What if, from one second to the other, did the Earth simply stop turning? It seems impossible, isn't it? After all, we are so used to the stability of our planet that we don't even think about the importance of this constant movement. But what if that happened suddenly without notice? How do you think it would be the impact on oceans, cities, climate, and even our own body? Would you be able to survive this catastrophic event? The truth is that Earth's rotation is one of the most essential factors to maintain the balance of our planet. Right now, while you watch this video, the Earth is spinning at a speed of approximately 1,670 km/h on the equator. This is faster than most commercial planes. We do not realize this speed because everything around us is moving with us, including the atmosphere. But if this rotation stopped suddenly, everything that was not fixed to the ground would continue to move at the same speed. The result? The largest disaster ever recorded in the history of humanity. Now try to imagine the scene. Buildings being torn from the floor, cars and aircraft being thrown through the air like leaves in the wind, oceans overflowing with mega tsunamis, and winds so fast that they would make the worst hurricanes in history look like a slight breeze. In just a few seconds, the entire planet would be transformed into real chaos. No city would be safe. No human being would be prepared for something like that. And the effects would not stop there. The Earth's atmosphere, which usually moves along with the planet's rotation, would keep its speed for a while before it begins to slow down. This means that those on the illuminated side of the planet would face storms with extreme winds, capable of pulling whole forests, destroying continents, and even sweeping people away, as if they were mere grains of sand. Meanwhile, ocean water, which has always been in balance because of the centrifugal force of rotation, would move violently, causing gigantic waves that would flood vast areas, submerging entire cities within minutes. But what about the effects on the planet itself? Without rotation, the natural cycle of day and night would cease to exist the way we know. A half of the Earth would be permanently focused on the sun, burning under very high temperatures, while the other half would plunge into a freezing darkness, with temperatures plummeting to deadly levels. The difference between these two regions would be so extreme that it would make most ecosystems completely unviable. And here's a scary detail. Earth's rotation is also responsible for keeping your magnetic field active. This field is what protects us from solar radiation and dangerous cosmic winds. If the rotation stopped, the magnetic field would collapse, leaving the Earth vulnerable to solar explosions and spatial radiation. Not only could this fry our electrical systems and communication networks, but it would also have devastating effects on our atmosphere, making it slowly lost to space. Now I ask you, if that happened, do you think humanity could find a way to survive? Would there be a safe place to hide? Would you try to escape to the bright side or face the cold on the dark side? Comment down here what you would do in this situation, and hold there, because now we will explore in detail the first seconds after this catastrophe and how it would affect every corner of our planet. If you have gotten here, you have realized that the rotation of the Earth is much more important than we imagined. Without it, our planet would become a true field of destruction, with catastrophic winds, out of control oceans, and extreme climate change that would make life almost impossible. Now, I want to know about you. If that really happened, what would be your strategy to try to survive? Would you seek shelter? Would you prepare for the eternal cold or try to endure the intense heat? Comment down here, because I want to see what you would do in such an apocalyptic scenario as this. And since we are exploring the mysteries of the universe and the invisible forces that shape our existence, be sure to leave the like if you like this content. This helps the channel a lot because it shows YouTube that this video deserves to be recommended for more curious people like you. If you haven't signed up yet, enjoy now. Thus, You do not lose the next videos where we continue to explore fascinating scenarios such as what if the sun went off suddenly, or what would happen if the moon disappeared. Now hold there, because in the next few minutes we will deepen this phenomenon even more and understand what would happen in the first seconds after Earth stops spinning and how it would impact every corner of our planet. If the Earth suddenly stopped, our impactus would be instantaneous and devastating. At this very moment, the surface of our planet is moving at a speed of approximately 1,670 km/h on the equator. This means that everything that is not fixed to the ground, buildings, cars, people, and even the air itself, would continue to move at this absurd speed. Imagine for a moment you are inside a car at high speed and suddenly someone step on the brake abruptly. His body would be thrown forward. Now, apply this concept to everything on Earth. Whole cities would be shattered in seconds, skyscrapers would collapse, and anything that was not fixed to the ground would be shot violently. But the worst still would be to come. Our atmosphere, which was also spinning along with the planet, would not stop immediately. For a few minutes or perhaps hours, it would continue its movement at absurd speeds, creating devastating winds over 1,600 km/h. To put this from perspective, the most powerful hurricane ever registered on Earth had winds of approximately 350 km/h. Now imagine winds 4 times stronger, blowing with global intensity, pulling forests, destroying everything along the way, and even vaporizing smaller buildings. No living being would be safe in the face of this brutal force of nature. And if you think cities would be the only problem, know that the oceans would suffer even more. Without the centrifugal force of the rotation to maintain balanced water distribution, the seas would become gigantic liquid walls, moving at absurd speeds. Bigger tsunamis than anything we have ever seen would be instantly formed, dragging everything that was in its way. The continents would be swallowed by colossal waves, and coastal cities would disappear in minutes. If a common tsunami can reach about 30 meters high, imagine what would happen if a global tidal was suddenly appeared, with waves of hundreds of meters. But the effects would not stop there. Without the rotation of the Earth, the gravitational field would change, directly affecting the distribution of land and water masses. The poles, which today accumulate immense ice caps, could suffer a drastic displacement, redistributing frozen water and causing a massive increase in sea level. New continents could emerge, while others would be completely submerged. The geology of the planet would change in a matter of hours, and the tectonic plates, which constantly move on the Earth's cloak, would suffer immense impacts, triggering an endless sequence of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The whole world would be trembling at the same time, with volcanoes expelling gigantic amounts of ashes in the atmosphere, blocking sunlight and creating an even more apocalyptic scenario. Another detail that few people think is what would happen to heaven itself. Yes, that's right. The sky would change dramatically. Since Earth's rotation influences the apparent movement of the stars, if the planet stopped, the night sky would be completely static. We would never see the stars again if they moved throughout the night, and the sunrise and sunset as we know they would no longer exist. For those who were on the bright side of the planet, the sun would be fixed in the sky, continuously burning that region and turning it into an infernal desert. On the opposite side, darkness would be permanent and temperatures would fall to freezing levels. And if you think changes in temperature would already be catastrophic, wait until you understand the impact on gravity and magnetic field. Earth rotation is fundamental to generate the magnetic field that protects us from cosmic radiation. If the rotation stopped, the magnetic field would begin to disappear, leaving us exposed to a massive amount of solar radiation. This means that any living being that was exposed directly to the sun would suffer extreme damage. Our atmosphere would also begin to be gradually destroyed by radiation. making the air thinner and, over time, creating an environment similar to that of Mars. In addition, time as we know it would also be drastically changed. Without rotation, the days would stop lasting 24 hours. Instead, each half of the planet would spend months or even years under intense sunlight before spending the same period in total darkness. This extreme cycle would drastically affect all life forms. Plants could not survive such long periods without light or without darkness, and entire ecosystems would collapse. Many animals that depend on the rotation of the Earth to hunt, migrate, or reproduce would simply cannot adapt to these abrupt changes. The impact on human civilization would be equally devastating. Even though some people could survive the early moments of destruction, they would have to face a new challenge, finding a place I have to live. With one side of the planet on fire and the other frozen, the only habitable region would be the transition zone between heat and cold, a narrow ring around the planet where temperatures would be more balanced. However, this region would be extremely unstable, subject to constant hurricanes, sudden climate changes, and endless electric storms. With all this happening, society would collapse. Quickly, food and water supply would become impossible as plantations would not survive and the oceans would be completely fury. Technology would begin to fail with the collapse of the electrical and communication networks. Without the protection of the magnetic field, even satellites would fall from the sky, preventing any attempt at global communication. Governments would collapse, and only small groups of survivors could resist underground shelters or special facilities protected against radiation and climate extremes. Now stop and think. If all this happened, would you be prepared? What would you do in the first few minutes after Earth stops spinning? Would you seek shelter? Would you try to escape to safer regions? Do you think humanity could survive, or we would be condemned to extinction? Comment down here. I would survive. If you think it would have chances, or it would be the end if you believe that humanity would not support an event of this magnitude. With the rotation interrupted, the climate of the Earth would become something completely different from what we know today. Temperatures would change dramatically, transforming the planet into an extreme environment where life, as we know it, would be virtually impossible to maintain. But how exactly would that happen? What would make the whole world come into climate collapse? And even in the face of this apocalyptic scenario, was there still any hope of survival? To understand this catastrophic change, we need to remember that the rotation of the Earth is what distributes sunlight in a balanced way by the planet. Without this movement, one side of the Earth would be permanently turned to the sun, while the other would remain plunged into the absolute darkness. The immediate consequence of this would be an extreme temperature difference between the two hemispheres. The sun facing the sun would become a scorching hell, where temperatures could exceed 150 degrees C, melting asphalt, evaporating rivers, and making any life virtually unsustainable. The polar hubcaps would disappear, the oceans would boil, and the atmosphere would begin to change, becoming extremely dense due to the accumulation of water vapor and gases released from the overheated soil. Meanwhile, the opposite side, plunged into eternal darkness, would turn into a true cosmic freezer. Without sunlight to warm it, the temperature would drop dramatically, reaching 100 degrees C or less. Integer oceans would freeze, the humidity of the air would turn into snow and ice instantly, and the Earth's surface would be covered by a thick layer of permanent ice, similar to what we find in frozen moons of other planets. The cold would be so intense that any attempt at outdoor survival would become impossible without thermal clothing and underground shelters. But the worst would not be just this absurd temperature difference. The lack of rotation would also completely modify the climate patterns of the Earth. Today, winds and sea currents form due to the rotation of the planet, which creates high and low pressure systems and keeps the atmosphere circulating. Without this movement, the warm air of the illuminated region would begin to rise without control, while the cold air on the dark side would become dense and heavy. The result would be a completely static atmosphere, where permanent hurricanes and gigantic storms could form on the transition line between extreme heat and absolute cold. Imagine a hurricane the size of the United States, which never dissipates, turning forever in this intermediate zone. Incessant rays would cut the skies, creating gigantic electric storms, while winds of hundreds of kilometers per hour would devastate any life attempt on the surface. Not to mention the acid rains and the formation of dust and water clouds, which could cover much of the atmosphere and make the sky permanently cloudy. And if you think this is already bad enough, there is still an even greater problem: the collapse of Earth's magnetic field. Currently, the rotation of the core of our planet is what generates the magnetic field that protects us from cosmic radiation and solar winds. Without this movement, this natural shield would begin to weaken until completely disappeared. This means that we would be completely exposed to solar and cosmic radiation. The impact of this would be devastating. Radiation bombing the Earth would gradually destroy our atmosphere allowing lethal particles from space to reach the surface directly. Air would begin to become thin. Sun exposure could cause fatal burns in minutes, and genetic mutations would occur at alarming rates. Human beings who were exposed for a long time would suffer irreversible DNA damage, dramatically increasing cancer cases and making reproduction a risky task. In addition, without the magnetic field, the solar wind particles would begin to interact directly with the gases of the atmosphere, producing gigantic auroras that would cover the entire planet. However, this spectacular view would be a warning that the Earth was slowly losing its air to space. That's right. Gradually, oxygen and other essential gases would be expelled from the planet, making survival of any form of surface impossible. The impact on wildlife would be equally devastating. On the bright side, any living being that could not stand scanning temperatures would simply cease to exist. Plants would not resist intense heat and begin to die en masse, interrupting the food chain and leading to the extinction of almost all terrestrial species. Supervisory oceans would also become dead zones, eliminating corals, fish, and other marine organisms. On the dark side, animals that depend on the solar heat to survive would quickly extinct. Only species adapted to extremely low temperatures, such as some bacteria found in Antarctic glaciers and underground lakes, could resist for some time. However, without a heat source, not even these life forms could prosper for a long time. The regions near the intermediate zone would be the only areas where some chance of life could still exist. However, as already mentioned, this region would be marked by constant storms, hurricanes, and sharp winds, making it extremely difficult to fix any civilization there. Humans would need to live in underground shelters, far from the extreme winds and protected against spatial radiation. But even in these conditions, how to survive without food and energy sources? Without the rotation of the Earth, solar energy would no longer be a viable option, as one part of the planet would be in constant heat, while the other would never see the light of day. Cultivating outdoor foods would be impossible, and the only solution would be to resort to underground artificial greenhouses supplied by geothermal energy sources. However, this type of structure would require an advanced technological level, making the survival of the global population unfeasible. Only small groups, perhaps governments and scientists, could have access to these resources. Now I want to know about you. If Earth stopped spinning, do you think I could survive? Which side of the planet would you try to stay? In the scorching heat, the extreme cold, or in the transition zone, facing uninterrupted storms? Comment down here. I would try to survive in the heat. I would face the eternal cold, or I would seek shelter in the transition zone, so I know which strategy you would choose. If the Earth stopped spinning, would there be any real chance of survival? with the planet divided between one side in flames and another plunged into the freezing darkness where humans could find shelter? Would we have enough technology to resist an event of this magnitude, or would we be bound to extinction? This is not just a theoretical matter, but a scenario that forces us to reflect on the limits of our civilization and how far we would be able to go to ensure the continuity of our species. In the first moments after the complete stop of the Earth's rotation, survival would be virtually impossible. The initial impact of devastating winds, colossal tsunamis, and mass destruction would eliminate most of the global population in a matter of hours. Cities would turn into ruins, and any trace of modern society would be swept from the planet's surface. However, for those few who could survive initial chaos, the next big question would be where to find a safe place to start over. The most obvious answer seems to be the transition range between extreme heat and absolute cold, a narrow region around the planet where temperatures would be less hostile. But living in this intermediate zone would also bring their own challenges. This area would be marked by constant violent winds and storms, as the temperature difference between extremes would create uncontrollable currents. The climate would be unpredictable, with permanent hurricanes, gigantic mud and dust and ice storms. Surviving outdoors in this area would be almost impossible without advanced technology and proper protection. Given this scenario, the only option viable for humans would be to build underground bunkers, fortifications capable of resisting the extreme climate and ensure some stability for survivors. But how would these shelters work? First, they would need to be located in the transition strip, where the temperature was not too hot to melt everything, nor cold enough to completely freeze the structures. These bunkers would have to be deeply excavated, protected against winds, and equipped with self-sufficient power generation and food production systems. Energy would become one of the most valuable resources, as traditional forms of generation, such as solar and wind, would be severely impacted. Solar energy would not work efficiently, as a half of the planet would always be lit and overheated, while the other would never receive light. Wind turbines, on the other hand, could be a viable solution, but would need to be designed to support extremely violent and unpredictable winds. An alternative would be the use of geothermal energy, taking advantage of the heat of the Earth's core to generate electricity and provide heating to underground bunkers. But the most critical issue for long-term survival would be food production. Without sunlight to keep plants alive, traditional agriculture would become unfeasible. This means that humans would need to resort to highly controlled underground farms using techniques such as hydroponics and aeroponic cultivation to produce food without depending on the sun. These farms would require a constant electricity supply, as well as advanced water and nutrient recycling systems to maintain production working. Drinking water would also become a rare and precious resource. With frozen oceans on one side of the planet and quickly evaporating the other, finding safe sources of fresh water would be a gigantic challenge. The solution would be in desalination of ice taken from the edge of the frozen zone, or the collection and purification of the moisture present in the atmosphere. Another critical challenge would be exposure to cosmic radiation. As we discussed earlier, without the rotation of the Earth, the magnetic field would begin to disappear, leaving the surface completely vulnerable to the sun's rays and the radiation from deep space. Anyone who ventured outside the underground bunkers would need special costumes, similar to those used by astronauts, to avoid the deadly effects of radiation. In addition, in the long run, radiation would significantly increase the risk of genetic mutations and diseases such as cancer, making human reproduction an increasingly complicated and risky process. But what if, instead of hiding, we could develop technologies to make some regions of the planet habitable again? This could be the only real hope for the survival of humanity. One of the most futuristic Solutions would be the creation of megastructures, such as giant domes that protected entire cities of the extreme elements. These domes would be equipped with advanced temperature control, air filtering, and radiation protection systems, allowing life to continue under an artificially regulated environment. In addition, some specific regions could become safe zones for human survival. For example, vast natural caves could be converted into underground colonies, protecting survivors from extreme surface conditions. The mountains and glaciers could also offer some refuge, as their structure could help contain violent winds and intense radiation. In the long run, the only definitive solution could be in spatial migration. With the Earth becoming increasingly inhospitable, efforts to colonize other planets could become a priority. Mars, which is already one of the most promising targets for future colonization missions, could become a viable option if the conditions on Earth became unsustainable. Another possibility would be to build self-sufficient spatial stations, true floating cities that would allow humanity's survival in space, while the home planet would become an uninhabitable world. But as advanced as these solutions may seem, the truth is that few people would have access to them. The resources would be limited, and only a small group of survivors could escape to these futuristic structures. Most of the global population would be ordered to fight for survival under the extreme conditions of the Earth, facing unbearable temperatures, deadly radiation, and the scarcity of food and water. Now I want to know about you. If the Earth stopped spinning, where would you try to survive? You would seek shelter in an underground bunker, face the storms of the transition zone, or try to find a new home in space? Comment down here. I would live in a bunker. I would try to survive on the surface, or I would leave for space, so I know which strategy you would choose. If you got here, congratulations. You are part of the select group of cosmic explorers who really want to understand the mysteries of the universe. Now I want to know about you. If Earth stopped spinning, what would be your survival strategy? Comment here below. I would survive chaos, so I know you watched until the end. And since you enjoyed this content, don't forget to leave like to strengthen the channel and help this video reach more curious like you. Subscribe now and activate the bell, because every week we have amazing content about the greatest mysteries of the cosmos. And look, here is already appearing a video that will explode your mind. What if the sun suddenly went out? Click now and continue this journey by the unknown.